So I've got my coffee, I've got my water, and I've got a problem. And so I'm just going to do a meditation on meditation. And the reason that I'm doing this is because this is something that I've not figured out. I've not figured out, as someone who is at my age, at my life stage, living what I do with the different responsibilities I have, what is the ideal and right way to meditate? And while I know what different psychotherapies would be indicated for what condition and when to apply them and what kinds of skills, I don't know the full neurobiology, neurochemistry, nomenclature, strategies, steps for all those kinds of things. So I'm going to tell a couple of stories where somewhere woven in are going to be what I did when I was 18 to meditate, first, second, third wave psychotherapies, the Bhagavad Gita and meditation, maybe a little bit about yoga nidra or non-REM sleep, and maybe a little bit about hypnosis. And I'll also share the time I spent, about 12 to 14 weeks, doing a daily mindfulness practice during COVID. And the hope is that by talking about this problem and grappling with this problem, I'll be able to come up with some steps down the road. So in maybe a month or 2 months or 3 months' time, not only would I be able to share with all of you a menu, ingredients, and recipe for different ways to meditate with different goals, but hopefully I'll have been to a few restaurants where I've actually experienced the dinners, and I can really describe what they're like for you. So back when I was 18, I don't know how this started. I suspect it relates to my parents in some kind of a way. Whenever we'd have birthdays, I'd always get like self-help books, like how to organize your life, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I can't remember any specific book on meditation, but I suspect there was one there as well. Because I know that when they asked me in my med school interview how you deal with stress, all I had to do was think about what I actually did. And something happened back then between the ages of 18 and 21 where I decided that sitting down and meditating for 30 minutes or an hour was not for me. Doing a proper yoga session was not for me. Some of those Kriya yogas where your back is straight was not for me. But what was for me was I would go to the gym 2 to 3 times a week. I would have a friend that I would meet there. And then what I would do is when I was doing a specific activity, bench press, curls, squats, whatever it might be, I would be focused fully and completely on that task. So I was not regretting the past. I was not worried about the future. I was just fully present in the moment. As I started to go through med school, as I started to dabble in neuroscience a little bit, as I started to get exposed to different psychotherapies, it became quite clear that all of these Eastern philosophies were slowly permeating into the Western world and the Western literature and the Western science and the Western imaging and the Western psychotherapies. You all may know that first wave psychotherapies is really about behaviorism. So that's like Pavlov and Skinner. Skinner is the one where he trained pigeons to peck on food and maybe some other things with pigeons, but really characterize that salivation response. Pavlov had it so that he went a step further where he could train a dog so that when the dog heard the bell, the mouth would salivate without even seeing the food. And with the first wave psychotherapies that were more behavioral, what was very clear is nobody cared what the animal or the person thought. They felt that with the right level of incentives, punishments, rewards, withholding rewards, you could shape any kind of behavior. It didn't matter what you think. The wave of psychotherapy that's really taken over North America in the last 10, 20, 30 years is cognitive behavior therapy. And that's very different, right? Because that's almost like that I think, therefore I am. It really is about, your thoughts are accurate or inaccurate, and you have to balance them out. You have to make them more accurate. Then you change the way you think, change the way you feel, change the way you act, change what you feel and your sensations are. And it's all about those thoughts. The third wave ones are the ones that I find quite fascinating and quite relevant to what I'm talking about today. And for me, they all remind me of the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita is an old Indian story, mythology, or truth, depending on who you talk to. And in that story, they have the hero, Arjun, who's a phenomenal archer. And he's standing there at war, right before the war, and he's looking at about 100 of his cousins, and he has to go to war with them, and he's just paralyzed by anxiety and stress. And while the whole story is much more nuanced and depth, I mean, people spend their lifetime trying to understand that work. One of the key messages has to do with meditation, and in that kind of meditation, it's more about using the mind's eye and focusing on something in the distance. And then there's one chapter where it describes in detail the beauty of the cosmos, almost like this zooming out for the cosmos. And by fully seeing and appreciating where you are in that cosmos, it's just the state of awe and the state of beauty that really shifts how things are. There's other things there in there too. Each chapter has its own theme. But the reason I bring it up is that with these third wave psychotherapies, you have people like Stephen Hayes who developed acceptance commitment therapy. You have people like Marsha Linehan who did dialectical behavior therapy. You have people like John Kabat-Zinn who did mindfulness. You have Daniel Siegel who initially had mindfulness, but it had already been taken by John Kabat-Zinn, so he calls his therapy something else. But you have all these scientists, psychologists, psychotherapists, sometimes they're all combined. And what they've all done is they've gone to some ashram, Buddhist monastery, some kind of temple. And what they've done is they fully immerse themselves in that way of being and that way of living. And then they've taken the experiential part that had meaning for them, and they've embedded it into this psychotherapy. And these therapies are quite effective. A lot of them are transdiagnostic. So when you look at acceptance commitment therapy, when you look at dialectical behavior therapy, it's not just the original condition it was intended for. It helps sort of a lot more than just that. And for me, I've been just trying to get it, and I just don't get it because there's all these different kinds of meditations, right? And with the Bhagavad Gita, it was all sort of about that direction, where we're going sort of thing. And when COVID came around, what happened for me was that my day shifted from traveling an hour to a hospital, working in the hospital, walking around all the different floors, driving home, and then spending time with the family. It evolved to 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in a room. I was in a room with a small window. I was staring at a computer screen. And pretty much what I was doing was I would see a patient, do a note, see a patient, do a note, see a patient, do a note, and then notes, edits. And then I'd get out at 7 p.m. And then after about 3 months of COVID, my wife pulled me aside and she's like, look, when you leave that room before you come and hang out with our family, I need you to do something. I need you to go for a walk. You're just a little bit on the irritable side. And so being proactive, like I sometimes am, although sometimes I'm not. And so being proactive like I was at that time, I reached out to the OMA. I checked and see who their psychologists were. And I got a book on mindfulness for depression, anxiety. And I actually paid for a psychologist out of pocket to go through 8-10 sessions in the book. And it was a very different experience for me. And even though I've guided people through different mindfulness exercises, I had my own form of meditation that I would do when I was younger. It was a different experience. And so I pretty much went through the workbook. I would do the 10 to 40 minutes to an hour of daily homework with it. It increased in time as the weeks went on. And what I found was that by week 2 or 3, I started to be able to slightly get into a different state. And by week 6 to 8, I really was able to get the most out of that sitting meditation. I love doing that sitting meditation. And the sitting meditation was fascinating because unlike Arjun with that mind's eye and the destination that he was aiming for, and unlike Arjun in that scene where he just sees the entire cosmos and he just appreciates everything, and there's such awe at the way the world is. This mindfulness thing was more about sensory awareness. And that sitting meditation made me in tune with my feet, my toes, my calf muscles, my skin, my hearing, my eyes, my tongue, my back, my neck, all of those kinds of things. And what I found was that the more that I did it, especially by week 10 to 12, when I would leave the office and finish my clinical day, whatever stuff had stayed with me in my body during those 10, 12 hours, I was just more aware of it and more present with it. And then what I found was that when I would spend time with my wife or my kids, all of a sudden I could be more present there. And in fact, when I'm working with patients, I'll tell them this story because while there's different ways of knowing different things, there's also something to be said for fully experiencing, living it, and embodying it. And I think I did a previous podcast on just a tribute to Huberman. I think Huberman has this thing that he says, you brush your teeth every day, you shower every day. Why don't you clean and reset your mind every day as well? And so with this in mind, I'm just brought back to this scientist, I think a cognitive scientist, although I don't know exactly how you describe what he does because it's so unique. There's this guy, John Vervaeke at U of T, and I remember going through his mindfulness or this meaning course that he had online, and I could only do about 10 episodes or so because the way that he thinks, it's so precise, one thing that stayed with me, it was the first time why I had a frame, or what it is the first time I had a clear framework for how you could have all these people on Twitter or on YouTube, on the internet or in person, yelling at each other, saying this is what the truth is, and there's just no dialogue. And he has this fascinating thing where he talks about 7 different ways of knowing. One is more propositional, which he says is more like the real world, like a dog is a mammal. One is more procedural, and he has all these explanations for it. And then he has 5 other types of knowing. And he also has a framework for meditation as well. And so in his framework for meditation, and during COVID, he posted a full course online that I've not gone through yet. In his framework for meditation, he thinks there's 3 types of meditation. And ideally, you want to find a way that you can embody all 3. And so what are those 3 types, right? So the first type is sensory. And the metaphor that he uses is your glasses, right? So you'll have glasses where you're looking at the world, but if you don't clean your glasses, if you don't know what's on your glasses, you don't know if they're blue tint, black tint, red tint, whatever it might be, maybe it's psychological where you're looking at the world through a positive lens or a negative lens. If you don't know what that tint is, if you don't clean them, if you don't have an awareness, you're not going to be able to fully perceive the world because you perceive the world through those glasses. And he describes the first kind of meditation sensory, and he has very, very specific steps on how you start, complete, finish, go back, how you build up the skill, all those kinds of things. And it's really just this awareness of the senses. And that reminds me a lot of the mindfulness thing that I took around one of those workbooks where it's more about being present in your body. The second way that he talks about, and I think the word is contemplative, but I'll put the actual word in the description, and that's where he talks about you start with yourself, and then you expand to your room, then you expand to your city, then you expand to the world, then you expand to the cosmos. And there's a very, very specific way to do it, step by step by step by step. And also, if you have symptoms of whatever psychosis or something else, you should not be continuing with it. Or if you have certain unusual experiences, you should not be continuing with it. And then almost to the point where you perceive yourself in the frame of the entire world or universe, and all of a sudden you start to look at yourself differently. And then the third way for meditation is more about embodying, right? Movement. And I don't know whether he said Tao or Tai Chi, but we'll include the link there. But he really talks about movement and the body and trying to create the flow state. There's 2 other kinds of meditative experience that I need to figure out a little bit more as well. So one is Yoga Nidra, where I started this course. It's a non-sleep type of restorative, non-REM restorative sleep. And the other one is hypnosis, where you can train your mind or other people's minds to get into different states, and then you can bring out certain energies or beliefs or stuff in them in terms of what's already there. But it's a bit more nuanced, so we may do a separate session on that. So So in summary, I talked about how I used to meditate when I was young and 21. I decided this was the way that I was going to do it. I noticed this infiltration of Eastern philosophy into Western science, Western medicine, Western ways of living. And I also noticed that a lot of these psychologists, scientists had been to different places in India, in Nepal, and in other places, Tibet, and they'd brought back some of these ancient practices and embedded them into different psychotherapies. And a lot of these third wave psychotherapies really incorporate some kind of mindfulness like experience. John Vervaeke also has this very interesting ways of knowing that I haven't even begun to dive deep to and get. Talks about 3 ways of meditation. There's the yoga nidra, and then there's also hypnosis that I want to be able to try to understand and compare and contrast. There's this other thing where Vervaeke's starting up this course on wisdom. And so he's starting on this course on trying to create a post-Socrates kind of discussion to create that wisdom state as well. And so while I don't know how all these different things are linked, I know there's a lot of truth in all of these different methodologies. And my hope would be over the next month or two, maybe longer, because it seems like it's going to be a lot of work, I'll be able to start to understand these different forms of meditation or these altered states. I'll know what would be indicated for what and when. I'll have some idea what happens at the neuroscience level, but also at the psychological level, and also what the procedural steps are. And I'll also have some idea of what kind of impact you can expect from each of these. And while this is quite a large thing to even contemplate and sort of figure out, I know it's something that I've been seeking for a long time, because there's so many parallels and so many nuanced differences and so many different things in these practices. And I would love to be able to help myself, help my colleagues, help my patients, help my family, help the world, or if someone's figured it out already, learn from them and then share that with the world about how these things go together. So thanks for listening. And if any of you have any tips or suggestions on meditation, what to try, what to do, please let us know. And hopefully I'll be back here in a couple of months with an update. Thank you.